Dade, you ready? Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll stand for a moment of silence and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, can we have the roll call?
Jamie Girardi.
Here.
Don Anderson.
Here.
Peter Hansel. Roberto Size.
Here.
Christopher Poole.
Here.
Chris Williams.
Here.
Chairman Charles Gray.
Here. And proof of publication, please.
The items were advertised in the Tampa Bay Times on March 16th, 2022 and March 23rd, 2022.
I don't know, let me ask. Do you have anybody signed up through WebEx at all for any item? And I think you can skip a lot of that, but you still,
Okay.
I mean, there's nobody in the audience.
Yeah. Okay, this is the abbreviated version. Welcome.
The bridge.
So, for those of you, if there aren't any, who haven't been to one of these meetings, we're appointed by the county commissioners and we meet twice a month. We serve as a local planning agency, and we're here to hear things that have been submitted to us either by the staff or by applicants from our citizenry, and to hear the respondents to those applications. So we have 3 segments of this meeting: continuances, consent, and regular items. I don't believe we have any continuances today, and I don't believe, do we have consent items? Are these on consent?
I don't think your ordinances are on consent.
No.
So
Okay.
Just 2 ordinances.
So, and we only have regular items. So, before we start the meeting, as is our custom, if there's anybody here to speak on something that is not on the agenda today, this would be the opportunity for you to raise your hand and come forward. I see none. So before we start the meeting, please silence your phones. If you have pagers, I can't imagine why. Otherwise, I think we can start.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman, you do have one item on consent, which is your minutes.
Yeah, there are minutes.
Oh, okay.
There are minutes.
So,
How dare you let me miss that one? Okay.
You didn't ask me. Normally
Oh.
you ask me.
Do we have minutes?
Yeah, there's minutes. Make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the March 17th, 2022 meeting.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion of the motion? If not, all signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Okay. Now,
Mr. Chair, while you would normally swear everybody in, I think everybody here is staff, and they don't need to be sworn in.
okay,
So,
we trust you.
is anybody here not staff?
All
Okay,
right,
so there's nobody to swear in.
okay. Beautiful. We can start. Take it away.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members. Patty Chris, Planning Development Department. We have 2 land code, development code amendments today. For both those items, you will sit in as the local planning agency. For the first item, it is PC2, PDD 220288, and Ed Zodian will be presenting that to you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Ed Zodian. I'm a Planner 1 with Long Range Planning. The matter before you is Land Development Code hereinafter LDC, amendment to section 902. The proposed amendments, oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Well, I never claimed to be technically proficient.
We
The
have
proposed
plenty of
amendments
time
were
today, so
presented to
take your
the
time.
horizontal roundtable and interested parties on March 16th. I'd like to digress for a moment, but if we can get this thing to... Just want to give you a little background. The current process for this matter is that at the initial application, when a site plan is presented, there is, it's complete with the horizontal features. And before the house slab is poured, there is a form board that's required and reviewed. And that form board does provide elevations. The proposed process is going to include those two steps and will also include a grading affidavit and an approved grading plan be provided. Now, if that grading affidavit or something reflects that this is in a FEMA designated flood zone, then a as-built for that is required. The site plan, the form board survey, the grading affidavit, and the final inspections do provide the safeguards in this case, so that in the event it is not in a FEMA designated flood zone, a as-built for that is not required. Now we can. That's going backwards. Or, excuse me. Here we go. That's the one before that, the previous. Thank you. There are essentially two modifications to the section 902. The first is in 902K1, where it's going to remove the engineer of record to inspect the lot and provide the as-built. Because as I said, what we're proposing is an as-built will only be required if it's in a FEMA designated flood zone. Next slide, please. It will add in section K4C, it will add a certificate of completion and affidavit of lot grading and finished floor elevation compliance, an elevation certificate, so that for buildings and structures in flood hazard areas, an elevation certificate and as-built survey demonstrating conformance with the approved stormwater management plan will be required. We are, again, removing, however, the as-built as a general designation unless it's in that flood zone. We request that you find this proposed ordinance consistent with the comprehensive plan and recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners. However, I am here to answer any questions, as is representatives from Building Construction Services.
Chairman, I have a couple of questions.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
You talk about, good afternoon, you talk about residential development. This apply for residential and commercial as well?
No,
or
just residential.
just residential? Okay. That's my question.
Okay. Anybody else? No comments? Okay. Did you want to add something? No. Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, if there are no further questions.
Just one comment by way of explanation. So I think what Ed didn't mention is that our current code is probably more stringent than the Florida Building Code currently, because we currently require as-built for throughout the county. Whereas if you read the Florida Building Code, it appears that it's only which should be required in flood hazard areas. So this is attempting to make our land development code more consistent with the Florida Building Code.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Anything else? If not, I hear a motion.
Motion to approve.
And second,
Motion and a second to approve. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Okay, our last item today is PC 3, PDD 22-0241. And as a reminder for this, you're still sitting in as the local planning agency, and Patrick Dutter will be presenting this to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick Dutter, current planning and development. You could get me to the first slide. Thank you. So we have some landscape code updates for you today, specifically in 802, 905.2, 905.3. 802 is tree preservation and replacement. 905.2 is landscaping and buffering. 905.3 is planting in the rights-of-way of residential subdivisions. So roughly, well, it's probably 2 years ago now, we were asked by, I think, the Tampa Bay Builders Association to look at amending some of our policies and our land development code to clean up some items. So we kind of formed a task force with county staff and also TBBA members. So county staff included Frank Galdo and Catherine Harper from the Cooperative Extensions Office for the UF Extensions Office, Elizabeth Blair from the County Attorney's Office, Mike Woodard, who is an arborist working in building construction services, Pam Shaw, who is a planner who is now retired, and myself on behalf of the county. And then we worked with Hannah McAleer and Bridger Demers. Hannah is a landscape architect from Clearview Land Design, and Bridger is a landscape architect from Level Up Consulting. So that is the group that worked on these improvements. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. What's that? I will try next time. So it might be kind of hard for you to see. It's kind of hard for me to see. But there are quite a lot of improvements that we had done. There were, I think, 3 or 4 main things that the TBBA specifically wanted us to look at. But then, we kind of looked at another thing and looked at another thing and another thing. And then here we are 2 years later with quite a lot of tweaks over time. So the first thing, and I'll kind of skip around this list a little bit. If there's something in here that you want me to speak to specifically, I can. But a few of the things is we're allowing for tree sample surveys for developments. So when we have giant projects with large acreage, what happens often is can be a whole lot of trees on a project site. But what we have allowed in the past through the alternative standard process is to allow people with staff approval to sample certain areas. So they're not sampling all of the trees in a project area. They're doing representative samples in different areas to come to a number for tree replacement. Some of the other things that we're doing, we're defining what a shade tree is. We're defining what an ornamental tree is.
Let me just go back for 1 second. I just want to make sure I understand the purpose of samples.
Sure.
What does that do?
Sure. So the purpose of the sample, let's say you have a 100-acre project and there's a whole bunch of trees on that. Someone's got to go out there and measure each individual tree to figure out, okay, if you're taking down trees, how many inches do you need to replace over time? Okay. That can be quite time consuming. So what we've done in the past is we've allowed people to sample certain areas with county approval. So we'll kind of both look and try and find the right mix of, okay, we understand that area is...
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Sure. Some of the other things that we did, again, we defined ornamental and shade tree. Some other things we've updated, there's a requirement that 70% of our buffers needed to have landscaping in them. Essentially what that ended up doing is most of our buffers would have ground cover plantings and they would have mulch. Those ground covers generally don't survive very long, so you've got most of your buffer basically being mulch and a little bit of landscaping. So we tweaked that requirement a little bit to, rather than have that 70% rule, we added some additional landscaping specifically in our buffering requirements. Some of the other things that we did, we had to tweak our buffers a little bit. One of them was the vehicle dealership buffer that we had tweaked. The original buffer saw it be 75 feet wide, which is quite a large buffer space. The code currently doesn't even have a visual screening component for it, which is probably the most important thing you want when you're having a vehicle dealership abutting a residential project. So we shortened that buffer width and we added the visual screening component to it as well. So we kind of made that swap. We clarified what's required in vehicle use area landscaping. So there was obviously back and forth between staff and applicants about what the appropriate landscaping was in those areas. We clarified that. We updated a lot of links that we had. We had the links to outside resources that were old and outdated, so we updated those links. We have a more accurate link to invasive species list. So we updated the link to that as well. And addition to this, we currently, one of the code sections that I talked about was 905.3, which is plantings within the rights of way. What we did is we took this code section and we incorporated it into 905.2. The biggest part about 905.3 was a big tree list saying what trees were appropriate in rights of way, so in between the sidewalk and your curb and gutter. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to take that tree list and use it throughout the county and expand it a little bit, and we wanted to be able to update it more frequently. So what we did is we took that tree list out of the code, added it to the development review manual so we can update it more frequently to account for various different things. In addition to that, we had part of the team that you saw listed out there, primarily the Cooperative Extensions Group, and Mike Woodard, our arborist, went through that list of trees, found the appropriate spacing requirements, called out where mitigation measures would be needed and where they wouldn't be needed depending on the type of tree. So you'll see the tree list. I know it's kind of probably small on what you have there, but it has all those columns there that spell out where the appropriate place for the tree is. Quite a few other things that we touched on. I'm not going to go into detail on all of them unless there are any specific questions anyone has.
I have a question.
Sure.
And Patrick, I apologize because I should have bought this months ago and maybe at ODT or something. But so I was out west recently and I noticed there was many parking lots out west where they have these, what I'll call solar carports. Okay, they're basically, they're covered areas, but they're also solar panels on top of them. So they're providing shade for the cars and they're also serving as a solar generation facility for the business, basically.
Sure.
So as I saw them, I was thinking, is that even possible to do in Pasco and still comply with our landscape ordinance? Because what I'll tell you, what I noticed is the areas where these solar panels were, the footers for they were holding them up were basically where we would normally have these landscape, what do you call them, islands.
Sure.
And there wasn't any vegetation that would be there would die because it would be covered by the solar panels.
Right.
So I guess that's my main question is it possible for somebody to do something because it has other benefits, obviously.
Right.
It's providing shade, it's providing solar, which has an environmental benefit. I would just hate to see us do something that's going to preclude somebody from doing something like that merely because we say they've got to meet code on landscaping.
Sure.
So I notice you do have some exceptions for things like large vehicle areas, boat and RV storage areas, distribution centers, where you let them put some of their landscaping on the perimeter instead of in islands. Is that something we should consider adding a similar exception for somebody who wants to do one of these solar, I don't know what you call them, but the solar coverings?
Sure. I think they're a great idea, and I would love to see one in Pasco. but I have yet to see one in Pasco yet. But we do have, the alternative standard the main goal of those trees in those vehicle use areas is to provide shade, right? And if those carport structures are doing that, it's meeting the main intent. So staff would probably be okay with approving an alternative standard. If we started seeing more of these carport structures come in, I think maybe then we think about adding it to the code.
Well, but I guess all I'm asking is, do you already have this exception in C3 that says that for areas that are serving large vehicles, truck stops, motor vehicle, freight terminals, boat and RV storage, you say you can get a 50% of your landscaping can be transferred to the perimeter. Is it really much work just to add the solar, if they're providing that too? I just hate to see somebody have to go through an alternative standard process for something that we probably would encourage, because it's providing shade, it's providing solar energy. Why not just write it into the code as opposed to saying you got to go through an alternative standard process?
Okay. I think
Brad's
Mr.
getting
Tippin
up, maybe
is.
his thoughts.
Maybe get up. Hey, Brad Tippin, Planning and Development. I think that's actually something that we could probably add to that list of exceptions with a caveat that the county needs to see what's being proposed to determine if it actually meets that. Not a true alternative standard, but kind of an exception with county approval if the county determines that it doesn't meet that requirement to some extent, just because it could be taken advantage of.
I wouldn't have a problem if it said that it was providing similar shade to the landscaping or something to that effect. But if it's providing just as much shade as the landscaping and it's generating solar, I would think that we'd want to encourage that and not say you need some alt standard to do it.
Yep, and
I realize it's not occurring today, but I just was out west and I probably saw, at least 25% of the parking lots had these covered. Maybe they're mandating it out there, I don't know, but I wouldn't think we'd want to preclude it.
Yeah, I think we can put some language in there with a simple sentence before the next hearing that can probably address that. And we may also want to address things like electric vehicle charging stations.
That was going to be my next question. Thank you for predicting it. Because a lot of these commercial centers, as we start moving towards more electric vehicles, that's not just because I have one, but
You have one?
it's a logical place for them to retrofit, to put in electric charging stations is in the landscape islands. And I wouldn't want us to preclude those just because we say, oh, but you've got a tree in there. There should be some ability that somebody can put an electric charging station without violating our landscape ordinance. So is that something, I don't know where to put that, but I think there should be some allowance for that.
Yeah, I think that too is something that we can also address, get the ball started on addressing those as they start to come in, and we'll see if we need to tweak it in the future. But
I just know that we don't open up the landscape ordinance very often. It's for the first time in 15, 20 years. I just don't want to have to wait another 15, 20 years to say we got to amend the code to allow for electric charging stations or solar facilities. We should anticipate the future, that these things are probably coming, and we shouldn't have our code preclude them.
And, part of that discussion that we probably don't want to have right now, but there's, do we give up a parking space for that equipment and allow them a parking space reduction to put that equipment in rather than removing the landscaping features itself? Because there's other benefits of the landscaping features as well. So there's some trade-offs there, but it would be something that we can put some sort of language in here that would allow us to make that change without a more formal, expensive process.
You have some minor deviations. For example, you have some deviations when they use native landscaping. I'm not asking for you to give them a complete exemption. I'm just saying there should be some minor allowances so that somebody can put in an electric charging station without having to redo their whole parking lot or find some other place for the landscaping.
Yep. I think we can do that. We can find a few sentences in that section to be able to cover that.
Okay.
So
There you have it.
what would we do today about approving this without that language?
You can recommend approval with those additional changes. Staff can figure out the exact wording, but I think you could do that. It's up to you.
Okay.
Just a quick question on this. I know that Commissioner Starkey's kind of tasked y'all with looking at landscape improvements, and like,
Sure.
does this dovetail at all with that, or is this completely
I'm sorry,
separate?
say that
Does this-
again.
Does this dovetail at all with what she's requested you to do, or is this completely separate, or?
Commissioner Starkey knows about the changes that we're making. I met with her 2 weeks ago, and I think probably a year ago prior to that, so she's aware of all of these changes, and she seemed happy about them. So she might have other things that she's trying to tackle. I'm not going to say that I have all of them in here,
Sure.
but there are some things that'll probably be addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Just one question, and I guess first off, I mean, I think this is a very thorough job, and I think there's a lot of changes included in here that needed to be done, and we're probably long overdue, and I think it was a very good job putting it together. My question, at some point I thought I remembered hearing something about deviations as well coming or forthcoming for parking dimension standards. Are there any changes to parking dimensions pending?
Nothing is pending, but I know that is something that staff has talked about wanting to do for a while. It's just finding the time. This took most
Okay.
of the time,
Yeah,
so.
I mean, obviously the reason I'm asking, and again, I know there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and I'm very appreciative of all the work that's gone in. Just simple changes with increases to landscape island widths has pretty substantial impacts to people that have probably, I mean, here's an ordinance that's scheduled to be adopted here in 3 or 4 weeks.
Sure.
And I've got several clients out there that have purchased property and we're ongoing and preparing construction plans, and frankly, I don't know that we can meet those dates. But, you know, adding 2 feet to every single one of their landscape islands pretty significantly impacts
Sure.
their plan. So in turn, we're gonna have to come back in for alternative standard and do something else to kind of creatively
Do you want me
figure
to
out
explain
what we
that
need to
for
do,
the
so.
other? Okay. So what we did, our current dimension for those islands that we're talking about is 8 feet wide. With looking at, you know, we spent some time putting together the tree list with our arborist and our landscape experts. Most trees to be successful need a little bit more room than that. So we bumped out that island width from being 8 feet wide to 10 feet wide, just to give it a little bit more room. So that is the purpose, and that is why we expanded it a little bit. And
Yeah, and admittedly, I think that the 8-foot width, just for everybody's understanding, the 8-foot width, I think really limited to, or what I've seen, limits what you can actually plant in those islands.
correct.
So providing a little more width does give you a little more variety, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It just has other impacts, as well as some of the other changes in here have cost impacts and implications that people just have to understand. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, I've heard a lot of people complain about other municipalities and the costs of their landscaping requirements and everything in the code. Not frankly, I don't know that I've specifically heard that about Pasco County, and I don't think they're a bad thing. I just want to point that out, that's all.
Sure.
So we be modifying parking ratios then to compensate for that?
There are, again, staff would like to tackle the parking code. That's probably going to be one of the next projects that we do tackle. It's just, we haven't started yet.
Right.
Don't tell him yet, that's his next chore. Yeah, no, we have plans, and we've had a lot of internal discussions, initial discussions on how to handle parking. There's a lot of changes that have occurred since our parking code went into place, with ride sharing and other types of features that are really changing the dynamics of parking. Electric vehicle chargers being another one. So we're gonna have to look at all of that, so that is gonna be coming in the future, at which time we'll probably also look at dimensions, sizing standards, numbers of spaces, per uses, different things like that. So we are gonna look at that. And in the meantime, where this code impacts some of those other features for things that are already underway and you know, kind of deep in the design process, we can look at alternative standards to deal with that. We're generally realize that in most cases, we're overparked in the county. So, you know, we can look at some reductions based on certain reasonable criteria. Good.
All right, thank you. Patrick, anything else?
Not for me.
Okay, how about up here? Roberto, your deep thought down there.
I'm fine.
Okay, Chris, nothing?
Nope, good.
All right, well, if there's no further comments or questions, is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
A second.
Before we do that, should we include some
Oh,
language that's talks
With,
about?
with the,
With the,
what we
with
just
modifications suggested by David
Yeah.
and
Can you sort of outline what modifications we want to?
That they create some allowances in the landscape island standards for, solar, I don't know what you call them, solar carports? I don't know what
there's solar carports. I just looked it up.
the, okay, yeah. For solar carports and electric vehicle charging stations.
Okay, that sound good? All right, so we got a motion, that's fine, and we got a second. Any further discussion of the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay, motion carries.
Motion to adjourn?
I take my cue from
I
Jamie.
thought it would never happen. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And you did a wonderful.